You should be able, as an engineer, to deploy your own infra and then write the code. And LLMs have really helped that part. And the reason is you don't want to be in a situation where you're dependent on another engineer.
Welcome to Tech Teams Today, the show where we go inside the minds of the engineering leaders building the future. Today's guest is Yassine Açoine, co-founder and CTO of North.cloud, a company helping engineers and finance teams take control of their AWS and GCP costs through smart, decentralized saving tools. With a background that spans Siemens, Hitachi, and multiple continents, Yassine brings a uniquely global, product-driven lens to engineering leadership. He's led teams in both massive enterprises and lean startups, and he's fluent in 4 languages and 5 cloud services. Yassine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Love the intro here.
So let's get into it. Can you tell us a little bit about your company, what problem you solve?
So we're a cloud cost optimization platform. We help companies save on the cloud. Right now, we're on AWS and GCP, but we're very closely going to be integrating with Azure. Our mission statement is to be the one-stop shop of cloud financial operations. So if you think about how do I look at my cloud costs better, understand who, what, and where spend is going to, how do I make sure to save more, and how do I make sure to optimize my cloud costs, we want to be that platform. And we do that by integrating with your architecture with very small, read-only, non-permissive policies. And then we're able to kind of ingest all that information, do our own ML, do some LLM work on it, and then spit out all that information into an application that you can interact with and get all the benefits from. So that's actually what we do. We target everybody. We are definitely a little bit more upmarket with the people that we're going with because our solution is extremely helpful there. As we grow, we will obviously try to allow more and more smaller companies to jump in and use our product. But as it is right now, we're more upmarket in that sense. We've seen a lot of companies save a lot of money using our product because it offers them a lot of flexibility and better visibility compared to like what's out there. And we're working like every day really hard to make sure that we answer those financial operation questions that people have and the features that will actually help them versus what we think will help them.
Can you sort of walk us through your journey going from sort of a data scientist, solutions architect to founding your startup?
During that journey of working on the cloud very, very early on, leading teams, leading big projects where I was lucky enough to like given that responsibility, I saw cloud costs being a huge problem, but always in the back of my head, that's something that either procurement or the financial team was going to figure out and we're going to get to later once we had more time, which we never had time to get to. And that happened not only my older companies, it happened in the companies I joined thinking about that problem. And once I met Matt, my other co-founder, who was thinking about that problem once he was at Pure Storage trying to essentially sell on-premise databases and try to convert people from the cloud to on-premise databases, reading through their financial statements and seeing that there's a huge cloud literacy problem, not understanding what's going on, what's being charged. He reverse engineered that, saw that there's a huge opportunity. And that's where we essentially butt heads and create an MVP. And we have a solution on our hand where people really saw the product market fit. And we pushed since then. So we started with the product that really helped customers save. And now we're working on a product that will allow people to save, know exactly how they're spending, and then have full autonomy and visibility of their cost aspect.
How has your leadership style evolved from enterprise to startup?
I would say the biggest transition is obviously like the political landscape that kind of lives within those big corporations because of how long they've been, department structures, legal, etc. So the biggest change, at least from my side, was how quickly things can move and moving away from that older mindset and knowing that because smaller teams have that huge advantage to really capitalize on that. So really try to make sure that when we're building, when we're like managing, that we're not falling back into those older habits and making sure that we take advantage of the smaller team sizes and like the startup culture.
And just the ability to sort of be more agile and lean.
Yeah, and it brings a lot of advantages, but also the disadvantage is the fact that you can't hit all those different milestones, the security, the reviews, but you try to do your best there and try to like then refactor quickly, which is the superpower of like smaller teams.
Yeah, I would also follow up with sort of what do you think makes a great engineering leader in 2025? And sort of how do you think that's evolved over time?
That's a good question. What makes a good engineering leader?
Actually, a great engineering leader.
I would say it has to be like you gotta be super flexible, especially with things changing and not being stuck in your old ways. And like the super simple example is AI and how quickly it changes, right? So like 1 month you're looking into code generation and code scanning, and then the next month you're looking at the full like code generation based off of your entire repo, and like being able to be like flexible there, knowing that all those are possibilities. So for example, like last month you thought that something wasn't possible, next month it is possible. So that opens up the floodgates on like what you can focus on, what you can't focus on. So being flexible is a huge part, I would say.
Also, sort of, what's something that you believed earlier in your career that you've learned over time not to be the case, particularly around leadership?
Leadership is 100% about showing the right example, because you don't realize how much other people try to like absorb or learn from you, even though it might not be obvious. If you are the one thinking about security first, working through problems diligently, talking about things comprehensively, that will slowly kind of leach into the culture and how people really think about things. So making sure that the manager, the lead in that case is as technical as everybody. I don't think you can be as technical as everyone on all aspects, but being able to speak the language and push back and understand, I think is a huge thing. I think I've worked with engineering leaders or managers that were not technical, and the conversation was lost because there was no follow up on all the pros and cons that can happen. So really speaking the language, which means like keeping up to date and asking the right questions, is what will differentiate between, I think, a good leader versus like what I thought before.
Yeah, because if you don't understand the technology, you won't be able to ask the right questions. And on top of that, the technology is changing at such a rapid clip today that you really have to stay on top of things because in 6 months, your knowledge could expire to a pretty decent degree.
And I would say, like, realistically, you don't need to be a complete expert on all topics, but you need to at least have some understanding of like what's going on, right? You don't need to know exactly how to train a model, for example, but you have to understand what RAG is in order to have those conversations.
When you're hiring today, what traits do you look for that go beyond just coding ability?
I think it's a really good question because we've been wrestling with that a lot. My biggest challenge jumping into a more founder role has been how hard it is to hire good people. And obviously, ecosystem, things going on around the world. Are your requirements too hard? Are you like looking at the wrong things? But just in general, the biggest thing that I've kind of like shifted away from is hiring experts, and what I'm really looking for is like hiring generalists that just have really good critical thinking skills, that are really smart engineers, and then from there you can essentially guide them into different positions and then see what they want to work on and work from there, versus trying to hire for a hyper specific role where you end up being like constrained by the fact that this person is just good in one area and not others, especially this early on in like a startup. You want to hire people that can kind of do multiple things and have a focus, but still be able to kind of touch different aspects of the code.
Yeah, generalists, I know it sounds sort of like oxymoron, but generalists that can also go really deep into particular fields.
Yeah.
How do you instill sort of autonomy and trust and agency in your engineers without letting things get out of hand?
I think initially you do a lot of like hand holding because there's a lot of knowledge transfer and like showing how like the culture works within the team and what you want to instill. But you essentially gradually kind of let them own more and more of the project and then make sure to kind of give feedback throughout. But I think it naturally happens. I think it starts at the hiring process, like hiring the right people and making sure that you're very open and communicative about the good things that they've done and the bad things, and like keeping that very open allows for people to kind of have more ownership as they get more mature within the feature, the product, or the company.
So to double click into that, sort of what is your sort of approach to mentorship, particularly among junior developers that sort of started coding with an LLM AI co-pilot at the ready, right? So kind of a generational shift there.
It's a quick question. I would say the biggest thing is, again, it's the problem-solving skills that are those intangibles, which can be replaced by the LM, which I guess you could, but that doesn't really allow for a good hire. So what I was saying earlier about the type of hires that we want to do, we want to hire people that are smart, intelligent, that can do critical thinking well, ask good questions, problem solve, and that leads to, yeah, everybody's going to be using an LM for coding, but being able to pick up on what's wrong with what the LM is returning, or even if your question is correct, if your prompting is correct, and if you even need to use that, or you just need to be able to code. So the coding aspect is just a technical skill that people learn. I think you can teach them whatever you need to do. That's something that they can pick up on their own. The problem solving skills in the critical part is the one that we really try to capture early on during their hiring, which translates very well into when they inevitably will be using LLMs to code.
Yeah, we had a recent guest say, I'm not looking for software engineers, I'm looking for product engineers, like people that think from a product problem standpoint rather than just purely writing code. I want to go a little bit into cloud, specifically solutions architect. Obviously, you have a background as a solutions architect. I'm curious how you view how AI and LLMs in the past couple years have affected the role of a solutions architect.
It's made infra development extremely easy because of how structured and repetitive IAC can be. And that's a big relief, which means that you can have software engineers that can also be really good infra people, and you don't have to like split the two.
Right.
I think there's a world where the two being split makes sense for some companies, but for us, we want every engineer to be able to deploy their own infra, to be able to write their own code, and also do some data engineering. And that's kind of like the generous approach of you don't need to be an expert data engineer, but you should be able to understand that portion. And that goes hand in hand with like the infra portion with, yeah, you're developing infra and you can deploy those resources. And I would say like the other aspect is, yeah, you can't just deploy infrastructure without understanding how they all like connect and glue together, which is, I guess, the next part of that learning as you grow into, as you grow into like that position and learn more. So hopefully that made
Yeah,
sense.
it does. So it's like, back in the day and even today, in large part, you have DevOps, you have engineering, and maybe there's a little bit of overlap, but there's QA sort of in between there. And for the most part, DevOps is handling infra. But I would argue, and I actually wrote an article about this, that sort of the full stack developer in 2025 is a front end developer, a back end developer, a solutions architect.
Right. I completely agree. I think the solution architecture part is the one where there's a good amount of learning to be done, right? So understanding how to scale infra, be able to like have network security, proper permissions, et cetera, et cetera. But once that's done, then you should be able as an engineer to deploy your own infra and then write the code and do the data engineering. And LMs have really helped that part. And the reason is you don't want to be in a situation where you're dependent on another engineer. And that might happen, but if you want to be a really good engineer and have a really good independent team, you don't want each other to be dependent on, you want them to be able to like empower each other. And separating the DevOps from the software engineering is a way of keeping dependencies.
So do you think in the future, sort of the two will kind of merge together and you won't have standalone DevOps?
I think for huge architectures like a Netflix, highly reliable, highly scalable architectures, you'll always need kind of that separation or people hyper specialize. But on a startup environment where you just need to essentially set up a reliable, good architecture that has good software, you probably will not have that separation.
Interesting. So what's a trend, just to zoom out and sort of focus on leadership a little bit? What's a trend,
Sure.
it could be technological, that you think engineering leaders might be underestimating right now?
I would say the social aspect of growing a team. I think the human approach is very attractive for very young engineers, and being able to like do that properly, I think is like extremely important right now.
So like the human element of being an engineering leader.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not only just writing code, but it's also like putting a culture of like entrepreneurs that people like putting people together, speaking the same language, being motivated, keeping people entertained in a professional setting. I think all those things are very critical if you want to build a really good team.
Speaking of building teams, how do you think team structure, org design will evolve or has evolved with LLMs generating more and more of the code?
I mean, I think the big vision is that people will be able to code a lot easier, or you'll be able to have people code quicker and better, which potentially would mean that some verticals can be empowered by that. So instead of having a huge group of engineers, you could essentially pop a single engineer into a vertical and allow them to kind of support and help, for example, sales or marketing or other aspects. So I think that could be something interesting. I'll probably see that in the future where instead of hiring like a 10x engineer, you could get like a engineer that has some background in legal that would essentially help your legal team kind of automate some of those aspects where they wouldn't need to hire a team of 5 or 10 or X, where it would just be more of like a solo project.
Yeah, it's interesting. So like SMEs, like, but also engineers on top of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Going,
Like a market engineer from your side. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that is interesting. Not very common though. But that
hmm
could definitely change. Going into another topic, so decision making and product thinking. As a startup founder and a CTO, how do you make decisions when speed might matter more than certainty?
You just have to really think about all the pros and cons. I think it's the biggest thing. Sometimes you want to go too fast and just deliver features, and you have to realize that if you just deliver slop, then you might lose user and customer trust. So it's like striking the right balance of like what does a proper MVP look like, and how quickly or how little we want to sacrifice in relative to how much time it would take to develop that feature. So it's a case by case. I think it's a bit of gut feeling. If you know that this isn't good and you wouldn't be using it, then you probably don't want to deploy it. If you think that people will have value in using it, they're understanding that it's not the final feature and it's still usable, probably worth deploying, right? So kind of like it's a mixed bag, but it's a bit of a gut feeling as well.
A little bit of opportunity cost evaluation there. Now I want to
Yeah.
go a little specific into what you guys do at North. So I'm curious from a 10,000-foot perspective, how sort of this explosion of AI and LLMs affected how companies are optimizing their cloud costs.
So I would say the shift, we haven't seen too much of a shift into what they want to optimize, but now that they are using more and more LLMs, they understand that it's possible and it's actually bringing better conversations to the table versus very early on. We had to do a lot of education with customers to say that you can actually save money on your infra, and there's different ways of improving it, and we've proven that. So I would say that's the biggest shift on like being able to ask those questions very quickly and get those answers versus a lot of education that we had to do early on. In terms of just backend, there's a bunch of compute. So we see those compute increases. We see some of the larger customers essentially let us know that they're deploying big features that are very LLM heavy, and we can see that it's a lot of compute. We see a lot of like vector databases and other databases being used. So there's large cost increases there where we can also we also develop and like support more savings there. So there's definitely an increase there, and it's a different angle. I think a lot of these AI companies or AI native companies, they use just a bunch of compute in general. They end up being very, very funded. And sometimes they forget that cost is a thing and it comes to bite them later. So we started to see that trickle back where they're like, okay, now we have to be a little bit more conservative and understand that we need to reduce those costs, and those go straight to our cogs. And that's where we come to help and be like, okay, yeah, we can support you. So those companies I think will mature and they're going to start to like think about those financials differently. And it's a huge opportunity for us to jump in and educate them and help them and support them through that.
Yeah, I would imagine it's been a cost center for a while, but now it's a
Yep.
cost center that I think a lot more engineering leaders are aware of and sort of getting mandates from the top of how do we lower our compute costs or at least
Right.
better manage and optimize our compute costs.
I think I would say like in most like SaaS and tech companies, like cloud costs or software costs is the number
Oh
one,
yeah.
second cost. So after labor, so obviously cutting labor is not something that people want to do. So the second easiest part is cutting cloud costs.
Yeah. So you guys are in a pretty unique position to help there, especially on the like for startups, like that even could be the number one cost center if they have a smaller
Absolutely.
team, right?
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, how has working across different cultures and languages shaped your leadership style?
I would say so there's no like one singular trick. It's just understanding that people have different ways of learning and being talked to or with or organized, and just knowing that different things work for different people and it's testing it out like very early on. So there's no like one solution, but it's more of a, hey, does this make sense? Is there a different way of like talking about this? Do you want to do it a different way? And asking those questions until you get into like a diluted final answer, and then just using that throughout. So I think just being aware that people are different and different is good, and being able to like work with that.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And sort of going into that a little deeper, what's a personal experience maybe outside of tech or maybe even in tech that's sort of made you a better builder or maybe even a better leader?
I would say on the leader aspect, I would say probably my previous, I guess all my sports, to be honest. Like I played a lot of sports in high school and then a bit in college, but all the sports I did like end up being captain. So I think those leadership positions really have helped. I've always strived for those, I think just naturally. And then now seeing myself in like a more founder position, it's like a very interesting correlation. So I think those were super helpful, kind of like leading, pushing, and knowing that there's a lot of responsibility on my back. Of course, the table stakes for a high school game is different from a company, but when you're at that age, it feels like it's the most important thing in the world. So
No,
yeah,
no,
so I
that
think that definitely has
yeah,
helped.
that definitely makes sense, and I can relate to that. I've been asked sort of what are your first leadership experiences? I'm like, yeah, sports for sure. Cool. So let's move on to sort of our rapid fire closing here. So, what's one hiring red flag to you that you think maybe other people might miss or maybe used to miss?
Good questions. I think if somebody doesn't ask questions, it probably means that they haven't thought about what we do, who we are enough, and usually it means that they probably don't care about the opportunity as much.
That that's a good one. What's your favorite AWS service to optimize and your least favorite?
I would say Lambda because there's like a million different ways of doing that. I think it's just fun. It's easy.
Love it.
The hardest one to optimize, RDS probably, just because there's so many different aspects to it, and there's essentially like so many variables, and there's not enough options, so you're kind of constrained with like what you have.
What's one habit or routine that keeps you focused but also up to date as a CTO?
Scrolling Twitter.
You're gonna stick with that? Twitter?
Uh, I would say I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I think those help so much because it's very passive listening and listening to what other leaders have to say. So that's my real answer. First one's more of a joke.
Don't forget your podcast. They could be your best friend. If you weren't working in tech, what would you be doing?
Probably biomedical engineering.
Let me ask you about
Yeah.
the future of cloud and the future of cloud optimization. What do you think that's going to look like over the next, let's say, year to 2 years?
Okay, this is super interesting because there's a lot of people working on these like cloud agnostic tools that allow you to develop either apps, front ends, back ends, infra. And because they're cloud agnostic, they allow you to just deploy wherever you want. So it's really depending on what kind of credits, what kind of costs, or what kind of products are available to you and what you prefer. So seeing that flexibility will be very interesting to see how other cloud providers provide like the competitive edge, because the resources are all going to be the same. Now it's what do you offer that provider A or provider B doesn't have, and how do you distinguish? Is it through pricing? Is it better latency? Is it just other resources that they don't have? Is it better LLM access? Credits. So we've seen a lot of different providers kind of like cannibalize themselves a bit through credits and trying to get each other's customers. So it's been very, very interesting in that aspect to see if that technique and that strategy will actually help them long term. Because we do see a lot of people jump from one to the other.
So do you mean completely jump, like our whole stacks on AWS, now we're moving to GCP or Azure? Or do you mean sort of leveraging multiple cloud environments for different parts of their stack, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's and an or, right? So sometimes I don't see why somebody wouldn't jump to an entire cloud provider if a cloud provider gives them better benefits if they do so, if it reduces risk. Versus on the other side, I do know a lot of people want to be even more risk averse and have multiple technologies running on different providers. So if there's anything being pulled under them, they can move to the other one much easily. So I think you got like a bunch of different options. It's more about how easy it is to move from one to the other with all these tools coming up that will make the cloud ecosystem very interesting. Plus, you've got all these other smaller cloud providers coming in, offering even cheaper resources and different aspects. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting time because the AI LLM craze is bringing a lot of new technology, and then you have the crypto side as well, and everybody's building on top of the cloud. So yeah, it's just exciting to be in the space and to kind of like help them build better products by helping them like save.
So do you ever see a world where you'll be able to take your technology, your software, and just deploy it to multiple clouds at the same time and let your users sort of pick which one they want to deploy instances from?
Yeah, no, I can totally see where at some point they're essentially, before you even deploy your infrastructure, you get essentially a list of recommendations to be like, hey, this infrastructure will cost you $100. I'll just use cloud provider A, cloud provider B gives you $90, and cloud provider C is $80. Do you want the cheaper one? But then you have a little bit more latency there, and you can just choose one, and then that automatically deploys. And even more granular, you can have different aspects of each of those infrastructure being sent to different parts, where essentially you want to think about the actual cloud provider is not something you care about. It's just knowing that everything talks to each other and the network is pre-set up. So yeah, I think there's going to be definitely a world where people don't even know what provider they're using. It's just going to be hosted.
What's best optimized for them? So they could have servers in AWS, they can have databases in GCP, they can have Lambda functions, right? That, to me, that seems like a pretty interesting future. So Yassine, thanks for coming on the show. Very interesting conversation. For the audience, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you check out what Yassine and his team are building over at North.cloud. And if you're leading a team in this new AI era, make sure to subscribe to Tech Teams Today on your favorite podcast platform. Got more conversations coming your way with engineering leaders rethinking how teams build, hire, and scale. Until next time, thanks for listening to Tech Teams Today, and have a good one.